Hello everyone. I think I know everyone in the room. But I would like to ask, how many people here have not heard of BACnet SC? Anyone has not heard of it? Okay, we've got two. All right, so what I hope to tell you today is what we've been working on for the past 10 years to try to make BACnet more secure in some sense. And what work we have left to do in the industry to educate and standardize so that we can roll out this technology successfully to all the end users. So I've been at Cimetrics now for almost 30 years in some capacity, 25 years of BACnet standards. We knew that this is a slow process. We knew that. But 10 years ago we thought, okay, the time is now to put in place something in the BACnet standard that will improve network security and that will ride on top of IT standards instead of us trying to invent something ourselves that would be obsolete more or less by the time it went to print. So we started this IT working group in the BACnet committee, which I've been meeting for 10 years now, and Jim and I thought, okay, yeah, this is a few-year project.
We'll ram it through.
Yeah, we've got Cisco interested. We'll get their heft into the committee, and yeah, it should be pretty easy, right? So 10 years later, here we are. I was in Atlanta last week. It was last week, right?
It was just last week, yes.
Yeah, and on Friday, we finally approved the BACnet SC specification for final publication.
And you have handouts?
Now, this doesn't mean that it's published by ASHRAE yet. There's still some bureaucratic process that they have to go through for very good reasons, but hopefully very early next year, BACnet SC will be published. So what I'd like to tell you about is, although we've made it to this pretty important milestone, we have a lot of work left to do in the industry. BACnet International is certainly going to be contributing to that, and I'm going to ask Andy at some point here to give us a brief intro to what BACnet International is thinking. Maybe it's not officially decided yet, but the direction they'd like to go. So with that, let's talk about what's going on in this industry. If I can make the computer work. Let's see.
Anybody got a hammer?
Yeah. How about that?
He's good with these things, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Tell me about it. Okay. So the question that we've been struggling with in the BACnet committee is, how should we protect these systems from cybersecurity threats? What is the role of BACnet? Now we know that IT departments have been helping us to secure our systems to a greater or lesser extent for years now, right? We set up VLANs and VPNs, and we've had private networks in some cases completely separate from the IT networks that our customers have. But no one has really been satisfied with the approach that we've had in the BACnet standard. The first approach was based on something called DES. Some of the older guys in the room might remember DES. That was an IBM thing that was developed, and it turned out that they were in cahoots with the NSA, who had intentionally weakened it. But anyway, the first version of the BACnet standard had DES as its method for achieving some sort of network security, and I think no one implemented it at all. And of course, eventually DES was found to be lacking, and so the next thing came along, which we call Addendum G within the BACnet standard, and that was a homegrown effort to try to provide network security throughout all of the BACnet networking technologies, including MSTP. at Cimetrics, we were somewhat concerned about that approach, although we were directly involved in developing it. But our main concern, again, was, is this going to be obsolete by the time it's published? And boy, this is really complicated. It's going to cost us a fortune to implement this, and we don't know how well it's going to interoperate. So we decided to take a pass on Addendum G, and instead set up this group with Cisco support within the BACnet committee to try to develop something that was firmly based on what we consider to be standard IT networking technology. And it's eventually was named BACnet SC, and it's become more and more important what we're doing, because BACnet SC is fundamentally a technology that rides on top of TCP/IP. We're not attempting to secure MSTP anymore. And why can we get away with this? Because our industry is moving from serial networks to IP networks. And the move is accelerating, I would say. And looking around the vendors in the room, certainly Siemens is deploying a lot of these networks. I know Schneider has some capability in this area too. And the other vendors are putting out IP products down to the VAV box level. This is only going to get faster and faster until IP wins in most jobs, I believe. There are just a lot of advantages. Costs have come way down. Performance of the networks allows us to do a lot of things that we really couldn't do with MSTP. And MSTP, frankly, was a pain in the butt.
I mean, it was. It still is.
It requires care. I mean, it's not nearly as bulletproof as Chris's, what did you call it, blue cable network? Yeah. So,
PowerNet.
there are lots of ways to screw up MSTP. IP, on the other hand, running on Ethernet. And you found it? Is that what you said? IP, on the other hand, running on Ethernet seems to work pretty well. There are lots of people that can install the cable. You don't have to have specific building automation knowledge to do it. So this move is happening, and therefore we really need to focus our cybersecurity efforts on securing IP network communication. Okay? So, of course, the IT people have been working on this problem for a long time. They never really did that much with serial once you got past 2400 baud modems and the like. They went to Ethernet after ArcNet, and they went to TCP/IP, and really they've been there for, 20 years now?
Decades, yeah.
Yeah. So they've learned a lot about how to deploy IP networks and of course how to secure them. And sometimes it works better than others, but there's a lot of knowledge there. So when we look at what they've done, there's a lot we can learn. But at the same time, we have to recognize that our devices are a little different than theirs. And this table is our attempt to summarize that. First of all, although the computing power in our devices is certainly rapidly increasing, it's still pretty limited compared to a rack mount server or a PC or probably even my phone, right? The VAV box still has limited resources. But that's probably not the main concern these days, because the modern VAV boxes that are designed to run on Ethernet certainly have enough resources to run TCP/IP. Right? We've seen that. But we have other problems. For example, our devices go in all sorts of inconvenient places to access once they're installed. Right? With my PC, if it misbehaves, okay, I could take it to our IT guy, and he can more or less wipe it and put something on that will hopefully work better. But when I talk to your customers and some of you, sometimes these devices are somewhere in the building and the knowledge of where they are is gone. It's in some ceiling somewhere, right, Dan? It's somewhere. It is somewhere. We can still talk to it, right? But we just can't find it. So that leads to some challenges. Right?
For the broadcast out there.
Yeah, we can throw a who is out there and it'll probably respond. But anyway, we have to think in terms of, even if we know where the device is, we might not want to put a ladder up to go up there to rip it out so that we can install a new digital certificate, for example. So we have some problems that the IT people don't really have to face. Another big one is software updates, right? I mean, we're used to getting free updates from Microsoft and Apple and the like all too frequently, right? But the BAS industry seems to be different. Everywhere we go to talk to people, the manufacturers want to be paid for their updates. Let's start there. I don't know how much budget you have for that, Dan. 0, right? Right? But if we're thinking about building secure systems, then we're going to have to update this software sometime, probably, before we rip out the device and put something new in. So how is that going to work? What's the business arrangement? It's not entirely a technical problem that we're talking about here. But who's going to pay? Right? We know we're going to need to do it. But who's going to pay? So that is a problem that the IT people don't have to face to the extent that we do. And the life cycle of our devices is part of the issue too, because I think that most customers expect that when they're sold with BAS, they're going to get at least 10 to 20 years life out of it, at least the hardware, right? So a lot can happen in the world in 10 to 20 years in terms of software technology and cybersecurity threats. So I think that these things cause us to have to think differently about cybersecurity in our industry than the IT people do, although we certainly have a lot to learn from them. So how do we think about cybersecurity? In the BACnet committee, we have this sort of narrow view that we want to make the communication secure, whatever that means. Right? I'm going to talk about what our approach was. But if you think about, how should we actually secure a system so that it reliably performs the function that the building owners expect of it? It's a much bigger problem than encrypting the data on the wire or making sure that the devices that are connected to the network are only the ones that should be on the network, right? There's a lot of people and process problems that are tied up with this whole cybersecurity thing. And NIST has come up with this really useful framework to help us to think about the problem. There aren't any solutions in this slide, but at least it gives us some of the questions that we need to think about when we talk to our customers about securing their systems, right? So just an obvious one, when you have a building automation system and you have a bunch of controllers out there, maybe they're MSTP, maybe they're IP, and you got this workstation thing that's hanging off of it, and maybe that workstation is connected to your campus network so that the operators can do whatever they do when they're not operating the building. If I were a bad guy, where would I attack first, right? Would I go at the MSTP network or even at the IP-based controllers? Probably not. I'd probably attack that PC, right? So what do we need to do to protect the entire system? And when it does get breached, which will probably happen at some point, how are we going to recover from that? And even before we recover, we have to figure out that we've been breached, right? So there are all these problems that we have to think about solving, and BACnet is just one piece of this. So let's look at our progression. A little bit of history. BACnet IP was invented 20 years ago. It really got rolling about 15 years ago in products. So we've had this typical architecture of BACnet IP running on UDP IP networks for supervisory controllers and workstations and servers, and then field level networks being MSTP. We've had that for basically 20 years now. It's the dominant paradigm. And there's no inherent security, so the MSTP is basically, security by obscurity. Fortunately, nobody knows how to talk to MSTP, even when they have the BACnet Standard right next to them. So that part of it's pretty safe.
The decoder runs extra.
Right? UDP IP, we try to protect with VLANs and VPNs, and okay, it's a lot better than nothing, right? But there's a principle in security more generally, and I mean more than just networking security, which is defense in depth. We'd like there to be more than one wall between the bad guys and what we're trying to protect, right? Relying entirely on one thing, like VLAN, is not defense in depth. We want something more than that. We want some inherent security technology in the protocol all the way down to the end device, as opposed to relying on the switching and routing infrastructure to give us our security. So, BACnet SC, 2020, very early in the year. We hope that it will be officially approved. So it has a completely different physical architecture than BACnet IP and MSTP. It looks more like the web, right? These hubs that you see in the diagram are kind of like web servers, kind of, sort of, right? The devices connect into the hubs, and the hubs forward traffic. They mediate the communication between the devices. And all the communication is secured. All right? Now, that isn't to say that the devices can't directly communicate with each other. That's certainly permitted in BACnet SC. And you can see the dashed line there on the right side of the diagram indicating that those two devices have established a connection and are communicating directly instead of through the hub. But this is a very different kind of architecture than we've had up to this point. What is in common? Well, they're both IP networks. And they're both using BACnet. It's still BACnet. Andy likes to make that point very, very vociferously, right? This is not BACnet 2. This is just another way to convey BACnet messages. And we're going to be saying that over and over and over and over again for years to come, I'm sure. So BACnet SC is still BACnet, and although it looks very different from what we have today, there's a very obvious way to transition from one architecture that we have today to BACnet SC. And there will be a lot of BACnet routers out there for a while that sit between the BACnet SC networks and what we have today, whether it's MSTP or BACnet IP running on UDP. So there's a clear way for us to bridge the old and the new.
Jim,
Yes?
with the peer-to-peer communication capability there, what thought's been given to propagation? If something gets injected into a device, that opens the channel for propagation.
Yeah. So, how to put it? BACnet SC operates on the principle of you're either in the club or you're out of the club, right?
Yeah. A little more like a firewall defense.
Yeah, except instead of using a wall, we're using digital certificates. So, how to put it? We'd have to look at a particular scenario to better answer your question. But certainly, if a bad guy got control of the Schneider engineering tools, and they found this missing controller up in the ceiling, or they broke into the telecom closet or the mechanical room and got access to a controller that was running BACnet SC, they could reprogram that device and do something bad on your network. That is for sure. So again, BACnet SC only solves part of the cybersecurity problem. We need to think more holistically about how we're going to defend our customers' systems.
I mean, one of the ways like you said, I just sort of think of this internal, external. So internal, there isn't necessarily a BACnet SC security advantage. It's only to the external components or external connections, because it would appear that peer-to-peer isn't being filtered or monitored at all. So internal is what it's always been.
Okay, so when you say monitored, it's certainly not monitored any more than BACnet over IP is monitored today, right? If you have the right kind of digital certificate, then you can talk to other devices that have the right kind of digital certificate that will accept your connection. Right. So the hub is an obvious place to apply security because you can do revocation, for example, at the hub, try to knock bad devices off of the network. But with peer-to-peer, you're right, you're bypassing the hub to a certain extent. And then you have to rely on other methods to detect that something bad
But
is
that's
going on.
allowed within the schema for the value that it offers.
Yeah, it is. Because people don't want to have all their traffic flowing through the hubs. They see the hubs as a bottleneck potentially, a point of failure in the system. Right? Okay.
I just thought it might be worth pointing out that this picture is just a purely logical picture. Right? Physically, it will look no different. Those things are all connected to Ethernet just like they are today. You wouldn't see any difference if you just look at the thing. The wiring is the same, it goes together the same, the wiring rules are the same, all that hard stuff.
That's
All the
true.
magic's in the software.
Yeah, and you get some more flexibility in software. So I know that some manufacturers in the room, and we're among them, we like static IP addresses for our devices, right? We definitely do. And there are some good reasons for that because of the way that BACnet was originally designed. But IT departments would prefer to have the flexibility to assign addresses dynamically. So one of the advantages that we get in BACnet SC, as well as the security aspects of it, are that we can now use dynamic IP addresses, and things are probably going to work a lot better now because you're going to know when that IP address changes. All the connections are going to go down from that device when its IP address changes. And when you rebuild the connections, then you'll realize, okay, this guy's at a new address. So IT departments will like that aspect of it. That was sort of a side effect of our design. It wasn't really necessarily one of our main objectives here.
So Jim,
Yes.
the way that it's using dynamic is using the device name or the computer name or whatever and then sort of getting the IP address from it, pulling it from
Well, I would expect that in most cases it'll use DHCP
DHCP, yeah.
to get a dynamic address if that's what you want to do in your system.
So the DHCP server will.
That's the keyword, if that's what you want to do.
But that, so we've been seeing that at our IT network has been pushing the fact that they want the flexibility, just like Jim said, to change your IP address on a proper path. So it's interesting that
We get that request.
you say no.
Well, it's right now, the stuff isn't there. You change my IP address, you gotta go start my panel. I don't know if other vendors have the same issue. And then, of course, right now, if you change it, the BBMD is not gonna update, so you're gonna lose communication with the device.
Right.
Yeah, so I have some good news for all you BBMD haters. So we don't have BBMDs in BACnet SC, but we do have these things called hubs, which perform some of the same functions, but we think they're better.
Of course they are.
Yeah. In particular, whereas with BBMDs, you had to sprinkle them around on all the subnets where you had BACnet devices. With BACnet SC, you can put the hubs where you want to put them. And the only real constraint is that all the devices need to be able to find the hubs, which might be done using DNS, or I suppose you could hard code the IP addresses of the hubs if you wanted to. You have more flexibility.
Well, there's no broadcasting?
Well, there certainly is broadcasting because BACnet requires broadcasting, right? What would BACnet be without who is? I'm serious. It's really important part of the protocol.
Jim, I have a question.
Where is?
So, as of right now, the scope of BACnet SC, it can only talk to BACnet SC, right? BACnet SC to BACnet SC. Can't, right?
Right, except that when we want to talk between BACnet SC and, let's say, BACnet IP,
Okay,
we can use BACnet routers to do
okay.
that. Just like,
you said that earlier, right?
yeah, just like when today, when we want to go between IP and MSTP,
Right.
we can use a BACnet router. Although that functionality is typically built into supervisory controllers offered by the manufacturers. But in the old days, before that capability was there, we would insert a special BACnet router to convert between those two types of networking technologies.
Same protocol, different layer, all you need to know the port, right?
Yeah, kind of. There's a little more to it than that, but not that much more. BACnet routers are not particularly complicated devices. Except when you're talking to an IT department and you hear the word router and their ears
you say
perk up.
router and then
Yeah. Okay, so to the meat of the matter, what does BACnet SC actually define? Well, we need to get so-called secure communication between devices, and we're going to do that using the protocol called TLS, which happens to be the same one that your browser uses to establish a secure connection with, let's say, your bank website. And certificates are used. Certificates are a very important part of BACnet SC. So the idea here, as I think I mentioned before, is you're either in the club or you're out of the club. And if you have the right kind of certificate, then you're in the club. You can join the network. And if you don't, you can't join it. So certificate authorities that are controlled locally are the key to issuing certificates that let you join the club. And depending on your customer, they're either going to want to manage that certificate authority themselves, especially if they have a very well-developed IT group who is watching over what you're doing. Or they're going to say, what? We don't want to deal with this stuff. Siemens, you deal with it, right? in which case, hopefully Siemens will have some very convenient tools that you can use to set up your own certificate authority for a particular customer, and then sign all the certificates that are needed to allow all the devices to join the SC network. So, SC defines how certificate authorities do this. SC also defines how connections are established between devices. And down to the third bullet, the digital certificates are a key part of this connection establishment process. If I want to talk to another device, I have a certificate that's signed by the certificate authority. Hopefully the other device has a certificate signed by the certificate authority. We check each other to make sure that we're in the same club. And if we are, then a connection is established between those two devices that allows them to communicate. And the certificates are also used to bootstrap the encryption process too. It's standard IT, very well developed, well understood. And we are using TLS 1.3 for this process, which is the latest version of TLS. So hopefully the most secure, although we'll find out over the next several years, right?
So what does that do to just standard everyday troubleshooting and looking on?
Excellent question, Keith. All right. So, all right. So, see the hub up here? If the communication between two devices is going through the hub, then the hub is the obvious place to connect your Wireshark-like tool. Because the hub has actually made two separate connections. One to this device, one to this device. Inside the hub, the message is in the clear and could be somehow spit out into some sort of debugging tool.
Jim, the hub, that's not a physical device, right? It's like a logical software layer.
Right. It's a function.
Okay, so that would be part of the software layer that's doing the hub function.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Now, the BACnet standard does not specify that.
Okay.
So each manufacturer will come up with their own method for allowing you to tap into the communication that goes through the hub. But if you have direct communication between devices, a different method will be necessary.
And you will have to call Jim for that.
That's the 995.
To be determined.
Well, every manufacturer will come up with their own scheme. So, for example, in our boxes, we might have a USB port where we can plug in a service tool and, using some magic, pull all the messages that are coming to and from that device out through that service port, right?
So without a hub, two devices on the same subnet might not be able to talk to each other?
No, might not about it.
Yeah.
No hub, no talk.
They won't be able to, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they might not know each other.
Hub is that?
And let me-
Plug, you're not
Is the
getting
hub
it.
envisioned to be like a piece of like plastic hardware you plug it into the network to do the hub functions, or is that like a
It could
software
be.
driver that people have any manufacturers, anybody kind of taking stabs at this yet? I mean,
We have,
It would
and
have
it's a box.
functionality
a
that
little
lets-
bit of everything. Have you seen? Has anybody done anything here yet?
Well, the standard is,
Like prototyping?
No.
the ink is not dry on the standard yet.
All right,
So there
so
are no
nobody's
products
even-
out there, right? There's a lot of prototyping.
There are interoperable tests that are already going on,
Okay.
and you guys are already involved. We are, and others are too. So
We're
it's,
involved. Come on.
We have to go into the next club now.
Jim,
Right, yes.
is it, am I correct in my understanding that it's the hub that is checking the certificates, not the devices?
It's bilateral.
Yeah.
So the device checks the hub certificate and the hub checks the device's certificate.
Ah, okay.
That's different from how the web works.
Okay, so it's device to hub certificate match.
Yes.
So is that to say that a hub might have to maintain multiple certificates?
The hub will typically have one operational certificate for the
The
BACnet
network?
SC network that it's connected to.
Okay,
Only one.
so, okay.
It might have other certificates for other purposes.
But in theory, one certificate for the whole site.
Yeah. Well, for the whole BACnet SC network. There could be multiple
Right.
BACnet SC
Sure.
networks in the
Okay,
site.
yep.
When we look at the peer-to-peer case, obviously the hub is not involved in that connection establishment, at least not directly. But still, the devices are required to check each other's certificates to make sure
Oh,
that
so-
both of them are in the club.
Oh, so the peer-to-peer will still check certificates?
Yes. Yes, that's required.
Okay, that wasn't, good clarification, thanks.
Yeah. But you're right. I mean, one of the things about being secure is that you don't want people to just be able to connect their Wireshark anywhere they want and look for traffic, right, Mike?
That's tough to swallow though.
Yeah. Yeah. So
If you have the private key, you can plug that into Wireshark, can't you?
how are you going to get the private key?
Well, I'm assuming someone's got to load those keys in those devices, right?
The private keys of the certificates will be loaded somehow,
Yes.
but they could be in, a trusted platform module, and you might not even have access to those,
All right.
especially in some of the customers that you work with,
Yeah,
right?
that would be the other methods.
Yeah. So, yeah, debugging is going to be different.
Then there's the C Wireshark.
No, not impossible. I mean,
Pull your money out of Optical right now.
I'm gonna say we're back to black hats and books of chance and curses.
Fear not.
This could really unravel things.
yeah,
No,
we're
there's
going
a
to
whole
Zoom
there's
next
a whole
week.
program going on here. We'll get into it.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but I'll be honest. I'll be quite honest with you. I doubt that whatever they plumb in there, that they will give it to us. I'm straight up. I don't need it to be coming.
yeah,
They're gonna leave us hanging high and dry with this, and it's gonna break. You and I are gonna get dragged into some fiasco somewhere, and who knows where.
You
We're
call
gonna be
us,
standing-
Mike.
We're gonna be
We're
back.
always
Jim, we're gonna be standing around with black hats and books of chance and cards and wondering what's going on. And we're gonna be in the dark.
Oh, you got us.
But you'll have the
So would you
specification.
be
What
like
do you
the
need?
other? You'll have the other bag of tricks.
Maybe. Let's find. We'll see.
yeah, we're going to Zug in a couple of weeks. We'll talk to them.
Straighten them up. Yeah.
Straight them out. I'd rather move my retirement date up.
That's another option.
Okay, so in the interest of time here, I'm going to skip to, I think, what is perhaps the more important slide in this whole deck, which is what doesn't BACnet SC specify at this point. This is essentially a to-do list for the industry, and it's certainly an incomplete one. For example, authorization. What's authorization? Well, on a BACnet network, if I get on the network and I find your chiller controller and I send the stop command, right? Chances are it's going to stop the chiller, right? There's nothing inherent in the BACnet standard that allows me to specify which devices are authorized to do what. So manufacturers have come up with some proprietary methods to protect their devices, and I don't know how well they work. They're certainly proprietary. But we think that there's a need for standards-based authorization. In fact, we almost had it in BACnet SC until we pulled it. In fact, when I was here talking to all of you a year ago, I said that there was going to be a header in the BACnet SC message structure for authorization tokens. That got ripped out. We're going to have to put it back in now that we've gotten something passed. So authorization is not just for keeping people from turning off your chillers. It's also about controlling who can configure the device, because if anyone can configure the device, it's certainly not secure, right? Even if the messages look like they're kind of secure. So authorization and configuration, we believe, go together. How are you going to configure the devices securely? How are digital certificates going to be managed for these devices over the lifetime of these devices? People have some ideas. Some people think the certificate should never expire. That's one possible solution. I'm not sure whether the IT departments are going to sign off on that, because in the IT world, they're used to having certificates that are good for what, a few years maybe?
I think 2 is the limit now, right?
Yeah, and there are people who want to push it even lower.
Well, how about if you get to like a 5-digit year date?
Yeah, that'd probably be good enough. So anyway, we don't have a clear idea of how, in practice, certificates are going to be managed. But if they have a lifetime which is shorter than the lifetime of the device, then we're going to have to figure out how to put new ones in securely. And this includes the devices that we can't find that are hidden in the ceiling somewhere, right? How are we going to do that? How are we going to do this for third-party devices that might not have the sophistication of the controls companies? Question marks there. Work to be done. Backup and restore. I mean, people do it today. It's not really interoperable. But let's say that you guys are running a site and you're given responsibility by the customer for backing up all of the devices on the building automation network. Not just yours, but all of them. Because for cybersecurity, we want to hide away what we think are good images of those products so that if there is a breach someday, we can reload what we think is a good image. Wouldn't it be great if we could do this interoperably? Maybe the file formats would still be obfuscated, but at least you could take the file out of that ABB drive, put it in some archive somewhere, and then if that ABB drive lost its brain, you could put it back and do that securely. That's something I think we need to work on. Software updates are a similar kind of problem. How are we going to do that? How is that ABB drive going to be updated?
Required for security, by the way, because if you don't have the ability to update software that's may have been infected or corrupted, you don't have security. How is that going to be interoperable across the industry?
How are we going to do that? That's completely proprietary these days, as far as I can tell. So next item. IT departments are going to be more and more interested in what we're doing, since we're using IP and we're using their networks. So they have all these tools that they use to monitor their networks and try to figure out when things are not going right on their networks. They are probably going to want some information out of our devices. What kind of information would be useful to them? This is not necessarily a standardization issue, but it's something that we need to think about in the industry so that we can be a good citizen in their networks. Integration into their SIEM tools, for example. How are we going to do that? What kind of data should we be providing to them that would be useful? Okay. And finally, what are best practices for securing the entire network, not just the BACnet communication? How should we set up those workstations so that they're less likely to be obvious targets for the bad guys? Because they're probably the easiest way in right now, I would say, in most systems. So, again, probably not an area for standardization, but I think that people in this room would probably have a few ideas as to some things that should be done to make the entire systems more secure. And we need to get that information out more broadly so that we can really serve our customers well. So back to the NIST cybersecurity framework. If we look at what BACnet SC does, data security, okay, that's one we can sort of claim. Let's see, asset management, maybe a little bit, because we have this club system where you're either in the club or not in the club, so we're going to have a better idea of who is actually connected to our network now. Because they'll have to be connected to the hub. So we can claim a little bit there. I don't think that we can claim credit for very much else in this picture. But we need to think about it. We need to help our customers think about how to protect their systems. And we think that the NIST framework is a good way to structure the conversation that we have with our customers. So, only one slide talking specifically about Cimetrics, and then I want to have Andy talk a little bit about what BI is doing. We're going to continue our standards leadership, at least for a while, to try to move the industry forward around cybersecurity in particular. We do have a products business, and we have a new initiative called Secured by Cimetrics, in which we try to push for standards to come along more quickly, try to get more people involved in developing standards that might not have the official ASHRAE stamp initially, but can help us to solve some of the problems that I've listed above. And we'd certainly welcome participation in that effort from anyone who's interested. And takeaway, I mean, I worked on BACnet SC for 10 years. I think that it is a definite improvement over what we have today, but I'm humbled by all the other work that we have to do as an industry to really achieve truly secure automation systems. Thank you very much. So I'd like to turn over to Andy and so that he can talk to you a little bit about what BI has in mind.
All right. So let's start with we collectively spent 10 years getting to where we have a standard that embodies some inherent security capabilities that are consistent with the way the rest of the world does security. So we can have reasonable confidence that they'll actually get adopted and become part of the community. And we spent 10 years doing that. We can't spend 10 years getting to the point where it is the norm that systems have it and that people can effectively use it. Partly because the environment won't let us, right? The world out there is getting to be a worse and worse place from a cybersecurity point of view, but also partly because our customers won't let us. They understand, or beginning to understand at least some of the risks that they have, and if BACnet can't solve those risks, they'll go find something that they think will. So we need, as a community, to move forward quickly with getting to the point where we actually can deliver products and systems that live up to the promise that the technical work enables. And at least in the BACnet International group and the BACnet Interest Group Europe, I was over there a couple weeks ago and met with their board. Collectively, we believe there are two different parts to the challenge. One is getting the technical solution into products and into the field as broadly and quickly as possible. Because it doesn't help if the 5 vendors who helped to write the spec all go implement it and the other 155 don't get around to it for 5 years. So we need to quickly get product implemented. The second part is we need to educate the community of users. And by users, I mean not just building owner-operators, but integrators and design consultants on what it means and what it takes to have a secure system. Because as Jim pointed out about 18 times, The technical solution is necessary, but not sufficient. There's much, much more we need than that. Some of it wraps around the technical solution, right? We need to have certificate management, certificate authorities. That whole infrastructure needs to exist. And it's not clear the IT one is going to do that for us. And then beyond that, there's the fact that of all the security breaches that happen, maybe 5% are technical and 95% are admin for username and password, right? That challenge of changing the culture to a secure culture in building automation is at least as big as any technical thing we've accomplished so far. But we have to do it or we don't get technical systems that actually are secure. We get encrypted communication, which is of no value when a password is easily accessible and allows you to do whatever you want anyway. Even authentication doesn't help if I can authenticate by saying admin. That's not going to solve it. So both these have to be addressed, the deployment and then the education. The BACnet Interest Group Europe is taking it as their primary objective for the next 3 years to create essentially a center of excellence around secure building automation to create the educational content and figure out how to deploy that to their members. We'll bring it over here and do the same thing in North America, and I'm fairly confident the BACnet group in China will take it there, and the emerging group in India will take it there, so that we can have a real push to help bring the industry up to a level of understanding about what security really means and what it takes to implement secure systems using BACnet SC. On the implementation side, we want to speed up the process of suppliers being able to actually deliver product. So we're putting together a collaborative program among a bunch of suppliers and a bunch of organizations and a few experts to try to make that happen faster. And the program is still a little bit in its development phase, but we're getting pretty close to a firm program now. And it looks like it's going to have 3 components. One is we're going to commission the building of a reference implementation of the BACnet SC data link layer. Right, we're going to take this standard. One of the authors of it's going to work with us, get lots of people involved to make sure that what gets created is in fact what the standard says. And that now will be a reference implementation that maybe 18 months from now can be open source. So anybody can see how it works. They can figure it out. They can use it themselves to validate their own implementations against all those kind of things. So that's one part. The second part is collaborative education. As that's being developed, we want to have opportunity for people who are interested in developing their own or just learning more about it, participate in an open technical forum that's led by the developer of that reference implementation to talk about both the implementation issues and people's questions about, well, why would you do such a thing? I looked at that and it makes no sense to me, that kind of thing. Speed things along a little bit. And as part of that, we'll probably do 2 or maybe 3 formal webinars. If you were to implement BACnet SC as a product developer, here's a couple rat holes you don't have to go down because the reference implementation designer already went down them. So you don't have to repeat that error. To help people avoid some of the obvious mistakes that are only obvious after you made them. And then go forward from there. And the third part is we're going to implement a couple of advanced testing capabilities that don't exist today that are easy to implement given that BACnet SC reference implementation exists. One of them is going to involve putting a reference implementation of the hubs that Jim talked about up in the cloud somewhere. So any supplier can use that reference implementation of a hub to circle back to their own devices and validate that they can deal with an off-premise hub. And they can work through a process we're going to set up to arrange with a specific other supplier, if they want, to do one-on-one testing through that hub to validate with their own devices and someone else they think is ready to do that. And then if they want to, they can leave a device permanently attached to that hub. So as people come and go from that hub, it can interact with that device and they can see a whole bunch of interoperable, hopefully, instances acting on their device and maybe improve their device because they see what happens when all these other foreign devices wander around looking at it or accessing it. So that BACnet SC interoperability testing service will be a part of the program, and the participants in the program can have access to that as fast as we can get it put together. Another testing service that will fall out of this work is a remote interoperability test tied to the large volume of tested products that are sitting at the recognized BACnet test organizations. Right, suppliers have been sending devices to be tested for years to test organizations. It turns out that a lot of suppliers just leave it there, and then when they want to test the next version, they just send a firmware update and it gets retested. So all these tested devices are sitting on shelves. You want to pull those off shelves, put them on networks, with the permission of the owners, of course, and then tie those networks to a BACnet SC hub in the cloud, so that any supplier who's a part of the program and has figured out how to do this can take an SC IP router and from their own lab essentially interoperate with all those devices sitting on a magic wall somewhere in the cloud. So maybe you can test against 50 other supplier devices from your lab without having to build this huge complex wall yourself and maintain it and all that kind of stuff. So that's the aim of the program. We want to have a wide implementation of that. We want as many suppliers as possible to play in it. So we're going to set it up so that members of BACnet International, which constitute 160 suppliers, pretty much the whole supplier base, can access that program for probably $5,000, one-time payment. That's the goal. It's not quite done yet. Like I said, we have some work to do on the numbers and a few tweaks maybe with what the program includes or doesn't include. But that's the goal. And try to attack both the information education piece for developers as well as the actual, here's a reference piece of software that everybody can test against and ensure we have a common norm across the industry just as fast as possible. So that maybe 3 years from now, it's everywhere instead of 10 years from now, it's everywhere. Unless there's questions, that's this question.
Are you know, that all sounds great. But have you thought about tying the BTL listing? Like you cannot get a new device BTL listed if it has an IP port unless it supports SC.
Yeah, the BACnet committee would have to make it a mandatory data link layer, and they don't. So no, I can't do that.
This is a little bit of a. It could take 5 or 10 years then before we see.
It could, except I would love to have that pitch with an audience of suppliers, because here's the deal: you walk into a bid. Over here, I got controller works, does everything I need, and it's secure. Here, I got a controller, does everything I need, it's not secure. Which one will you pick, Mr. Customer? I guarantee you which one they're going to pick.
There's other protocols today that can be used that can check that box.
Right. But that's my point. If you want BACnet, you will do secure.
Yeah.
Because it would be a career-limiting decision to choose unsecure when you could have chosen secure.
The other protocols also have some authentication with them. I mean,
sure.
That's a.
But the BACnet.
We got a ways to go yet. If you're going to do BACnet, you are going to do secure. So if you are selling BACnet products, to decide not to do SC just now is probably a foolish thing to do.
Oh, I agree.
I had a question more back on the other theme.
Good. This is yours.
One of the things you touched on is sort of not just the technical security, but the culture security. And interestingly, driving in here, I was listening on the radio. One of the things they were talking about is, what's the best way to infiltrate a network? Money. You bribe somebody who's got the credentials, and that's espionage. So when we're talking about certificates and certificates for life, I'm wondering, is there thought been given to we've been hacked, send out an invalidate that certificate?
Yeah. So it's called a certificate revocation. It is not required by BACnet SC, but I'm pretty sure we're going to have it in our products. Because I think it's a good idea.
Value of that.
It does seem like a good idea.
You're going to check with the root authority.
Is there a lot of pushback on the
To
vendors?
make sure its
Putting a-
certificate hasn't been revoked.
I mean, I just beside myself. Why would you not have that? Because that's another change.
I mean, it's contrary to lifetime certificate, but
Then you
It's
have-
early
then you
days,
have
but
to have
the
CA.
fact is that vendors are moving much more quickly than you can imagine, especially the big ones that do enterprise customers like yours. Because there's going to be a bifurcation of tilt-up office buildings in the suburbs that people don't care about, and Fortune 100 military hospitals, universities that they do care. So anybody that serves those markets is racing towards this quickly, and the people that serve those smaller markets are not racing because they don't see customer demand. So customers don't care. You
We're
agree
gonna
with
help,
that?
we're gonna
Andy?
help customers care, but yes.
We're gonna try to help them care more.
Yeah.
So
That'll always be
that's
that.
something that we
Right.
might expect could be adopted over time.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because I was thinking that same thing, all you gotta do is have one rogue player get the tool to issue certificates, and now the whole pond's polluted.
The same with IT. It's
Yeah,
exactly the same
it's-
problem with IT. You're right.
Of course, yeah.
We can only be as good as IT. They are as good at security, short of the maybe national security stuff as you can get. As we draw that, we get as good as we can get with the investments that are possible.